When people make videos comparing bodybuilders to strength athletes, the training analysis segment tends to be on point, but the conclusions that are drawn from that are factually wrong on every possible level. And in today's video, I'll be pointing out some key observations that really prove what I'm saying. First being accounting for natural status, which is the most important factor in the discussion. Everything I'm about to say leans on this one point, for the simple reason that at the elite level of, say, powerlifting or bodybuilding, the strength and size elements cannot be separated. What we're talking about here is a ratio. Have you ever been to a natural bodybuilding show or a powerlifting competition where real naturals are actually displaying their performance? The reality is that they don't look that much different from each other. Reason why your mind is so confused is that you've been comparing the best bodybuilders who are roided out of their damn mind to the best powerlifters that are also roided out of their damn mind. And it's the drugs that makes that separation seem more apparent. But when you scrap that out, they're both very muscular and strong because there's only so much muscle you can build naturally for one. And the second thing is that to be the best strength athlete, you need to maximize your muscle size in the first place. This is a fact, not even up for debate anymore. A bigger muscle has more strength potential. That means if you want the biggest bench press as a natural, your shoulders, chest, and triceps must, it's literally necessary that they reach their peak natural size. Otherwise, you'll never have your peak natural bench. And when we flip that around, talking about bodybuilders, you'll hear guys saying that they're weak, when that can be further from the truth. Yes, the rep ranges don't matter as much, which research is constantly showing in regards to muscular hypertrophy, but if that muscle potential has already been realized, then it's simply a matter of specializing with the lower reps, with the higher percentages, getting more specific. And guess what? We also see this in the real world where bodybuilders, either natural or enhanced, but I'm talking about the natty ones, when they start doing powerlifting training, they get insanely strong fast because they were already at high level of performance to begin with. Most of them could at least bench 315 or very close to it, but then they run a strength training program and they hit elite within a year or two. They're competing with the best of the best in the powerlifting scene. So even though you may have neglected a certain side for a long time, it's not truly a yin and yang situation. There's a lot more balance when we look at things holistically and long term. Doesn't that make sense and explains perfectly what is actually happening in the real world over decades of lifting history, comparing actual natural bodybuilders to actual natural powerlifters? The gap is not as wide as we once thought. The performance display is a ratio, but still high no matter what you choose to do. And the aesthetics part has to do with a few other factors, which oftentimes has nothing to do with training style. So if you train for strength, realistically, what muscle groups might be lagging? Maybe your upper chest, your side delts, your biceps, your calves. But overall, the big compound movements, the major muscle groups, are not limited in any type of way. You're hitting them optimally. And regardless of what you decide to do, progressive overload is still the foundation of everything. Doesn't matter if you're doing reps of 15, reps of 5, still performance needs to be increased over time. So the same objectives are taking place. Just that exercise selection and intensity might differ. And volume will likely be high on both levels as well, just so you know. As I point out, if you have a strength athlete stand right next to a bodybuilder, they look very similar. The differences lie in individual genetics. There's more variance within people that needs to be factored in. If you're naturally gifted for powerlifting, you have certain leverages, then maybe that explains why you're proportionally smaller. But if you become the best version of you as a powerlifter, then your maximum size will be realized at the same time. But even if you're hitting your maximum size, for you, that still might not be the same potential as some other guy who is doing bodybuilding. So we need to think about the fact that guys who compete in certain sports have a gravitation towards it. It's like saying basketball makes you taller, or that doing gymnastics makes you shorter if you start at a young age. For example, you're a powerlifter who's 5'5", weighing at 165. That's your weight class, and you're relatively lean. You find me your bodybuilding equivalent, a guy who has very similar stats to you, weight-wise and body fat-wise. You'd look so similar it'd blow your mind. Lean body mass is what needs to be accounted for. Beyond all that stuff, it's the individual factors, the way your muscles are shaped, the muscle belly fullness, and just how you store fat. The actual stats are what we need to be looking at. Take that same example and the bodybuilder has 10 pounds over you. Well, it's not because he does bodybuilding that he's bigger. It's that he just is more jacked. But you would have gotten to that level of musculature if you raise your strength to your highest degree possible. Right now, you might have slightly better performance because of specificity, but at some point, if you're trained long enough, you're going to get that 10 pounds if you had the genetics to account for it. So sometimes when we make comparisons, it's an elite bodybuilder versus an intermediate powerlifter. But because the performance is relatively similar, you think that it has to do with the bodybuilding training, when in reality, it has everything to do with your training experience. And it can go either way. If the bodybuilder had 10 pounds less than you, you would be like, oh, damn, powerlifting makes you more jacked. But that's not at all what's happening here. We have to equate all the variables. And usually what we see stereotypically are fatter powerlifters or generally in a fluffier state. They tend not to have as clean diets. They prefer having a little bit of fluff, often enhances their leverages for certain lifts like the bench press, or they just feel better, right? I think most would agree that 12 to 15% is more common for strength athletes. 8 to 10 is very common for bodybuilders. But again, it has to do with revealing the proportions that are already there. When I'm really bulky in the 180s, I have no striations. I have no bicep veins. I don't think I can stand next to a bodybuilder and have the same level of proportions. But when I'm 165 pounds and I'm posing in the locker room, I think I look pretty damn good. And I don't think that if you look at my lean body mass, that would indicate a lagging situation of muscle, or that another guy who has my stats would be that much heavier than me. Look at the fat free mass index, guys. That puts things into greater perspective. And even though I'm not a strength athlete or bodybuilder, I do incorporate elements from both worlds. And if you want to be the best at either, you're probably gonna do the same thing, just saying. On another note, I would say that minimalism is more likely to yield muscular imbalances. But eventually you're probably gonna get out of that and focus more on your weaknesses. So since everything's gonna get jacked from head to toe, the muscular imbalance perspective is less of a concern. That's why the body fat and individual genetics matters more so than anything else. And then performance is just relative. And weight classes too, by the way. 165s and 181s don't look the same. They can be similar, but usually weight classes are height classes in disguise. And that's why we have to match people according to those measurements. Not just say, oh, this guy's a powerlifter, this guy's a bodybuilder. Not correct. That's why I stated in the beginning of this video, when both the lifters are natty and similar in stature, weight, body fat, etc., and they get to the elite level of either, everything collides. We can have discussions about training style, and those are entirely valid. But when we observe things from a long-term perspective, things are not as black and white as some lifters would have you believe. And everything I said in today's video has been observed in the real world regarding real naturals. And that is a point that I want to finish off with as well. When you take out the drugs, division pretty much disappears after a certain point. It's what we see in YouTube fitness. It's what we've seen with the old school lifters. And it's what we will continue seeing in guys who have chosen this beautiful path. So that said, guys, I hope you enjoyed this segment. Quick little analysis, nothing too crazy, but I want to know your feedback now. What do you think of the topic? Do you want more segments like this? Let's hear it. And I'll talk to you in the next video.